infanticize populations, right?
Yeah.
We know best, we understand, and when the space is created to speak, for them to speak, we kind of like package it like it's a child. I mean, those realities are real, right?
Absolutely.
I'm not gonna be confused, and I think even people with the best intention in this space, you know, come at it in a place like we know best, right?
Yeah. I think
That
we've
being
all done
so,
it, right?
yes, we all done it, and you know, I'm as guilty of this as anybody else because I work but for international organizations in my career. But for me, I think we are at a point right now where I feel it is imperative for us to really consider if changes are going to happen, it cannot be the same old method, it cannot be the same approach, it
Yeah.
cannot be the same voices.
Yeah.
And so part of that transformation fundamentally require the people being their own actors, right? People shaping the stories that they see as relevant from their own experiences.
When you're at the leadership table, look around your organization. There's so many people that you don't pay attention to them because they're not in the leadership team and they don't have anything to say. But if they're from that country, they have a lot to say. They may not say to you, but they have a lot of opinions.
Yeah.
I've yet to meet a young Haitian woman that didn't have a perspective on the Haiti reconstruction. All of the young women I interacted with had an opinion, had ideas, had thoughts, none of which were shared, but they had a lot of opinion. Be prepared to hear what you don't want to hear, right? That's the work that we do.
You know, the more I thought about it, what I recognized, and I think this is very much now, you know, we have conversations around diversity and inclusion, and I think that's really important. But I think in the absence of really interrogating why the structures are as they are, we really need, I think, to start talking about racism and not tiptoe around and call it whatever colonial undertones or you know, sort of exclusion, or call it diversity, or referring to it as diversity, because actually it's a structural thing, and without understanding the structural underpinnings of why it exists as it does, why people of colour who are working in this sector still are feeling marginalised, speaks to something which is much more structural. And so the kind of piecemeal addressing through individual projects, I feel, will never ever be able to fully, you know, address these fundamental structural issues, which I think are parlaying out in a new form of colonialism, which itself is not addressing what the causes of this disparity around race, you know, focusing everything through a lens, what I think is, what I've seen referred to as the white gaze of development, where the norm is seen in one way and everybody else is othered. So for me, it's very much about really, really pushing into those uncomfortable conversations and addressing the fact that as people of colour working in an industry in a context which is predominantly white, there are feelings, there are histories which without an understanding of will prohibit moving forward.
Like I said recently at a conference in Iceland, if people are showing off and saying they're doing gender justice brilliantly and they're not thinking about race, then you're not doing gender justice brilliantly, right? Because our experiences of gender discrimination are always racialized. And they're racialized, and if you're white, they happen to be racialized in the sense that gives you privilege and that gives you protection. And if you're black, what it does is it means that you are exposed to a certain type of subjugation. And of course, within that, we know we've got spectrums, you know, you have, you know, access that's based on caste and location and class and shade and all that. So it's not like black is this homogenous thing. It's complicated. But being able to actually at least go, race matters in this conversation. Race has to be part of any kind of feminist conversation. For me, that's the magic of intersectionality, because it always brings us back to what's the lived experience of any woman of color anywhere in the globe, and actually, you know, how does that connect to her gender? And the other aspect of it is intersectionality does a thing which is, this is not about piling oppression on top of oppression, because that's the other way that people struggle with it. It is about the intersection. It's not that. It's saying, it's actually saying there's this acute thing happening right there. What's the thing happening right there? And it allows us to attend to that. It allows us to articulate it. And for me, it creates a space to resist. And that is also the magic.
Until international development really gets transformed and changed and maybe dissolves, as we say, you know, to transform, what does it take actually for international development to be truly relevant and to really be in solidarity with people and serve a right role?
Yeah.
That, you know, that may involve some dissolving or dismantling, as we're, you know, we see in some cases.
Yeah.
And confrontation of the way that race is constructed, and so much, all these aspects of identity really are socially constructed, and we can reclaim them for ourselves and our communities. And yet there's this other reality that, you know, it's not usually Africans running international development agencies, for instance.
Yeah.
You know, there's some confrontation that needs to happen there.
Yeah.
If you don't have diversity, or worse still, if you've replicated power structures from outside, you know, from the wider society within your own institutions, no wonder you have that sort of patronizing or paternalistic approach to the world, right? Because you've come from, you've benefited from that privilege, and you've failed to see or recognize some of the structural inequalities or imbalances out there. And you know, again, the good news at Oxfam, I hope, is that the last year in particular has put a really sharp focus on some of these issues. You know, I talked about the race process. We've got another process on culture change, where we've done a huge survey to look at the underlying drivers of Oxfam culture, including this sort of, you know, this notion that, you know, we know best, or we are good people. You know, that's another development characteristic, I think. And yes, I think the vast majority of people who work in the development sector are fantastic people, deeply committed to, you know, progressive values. But you can't build accountable organizations just on that belief, right? No. And no wonder then we end up having these shortcomings around the gross abuse of power that happens because people exploit this sort of rather naive approach to saying, "Oh, we're all good people, we'll be fine." Yeah. And of course, I'm not saying that this is just about a few bad apples. Please don't get me wrong, because I think it's not. But it's about creating an institution that has a blind spot to the abuse of power, because we're so convinced that everything is going to be fine. We're good people. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually think that getting away from the idea of a few bad apples is actually something about acknowledging that we're not always good people. Not to say that we don't have good intentions and we're not trying to be good people, but actually maybe the point is not that we're good people, but that we're people trying to create change, and that we're not perfect. You know, and from that place, there's so much more that you can open up in terms of accountability and justice, I think.